What I'm going to do here is talk about soil, and talk about soil from an archaeological perspective, which is a perspective quite different from the perspective that is typical of totalitarian regimes, and particularly fascist regimes. Ideas of the soil are very present in totalitarian ideologies, in fascist ideologies. But these ideas of the soil, which are related to ideas of the land, ideas of blood, are very dematerialized. They are very intangible. They are very aestheticized and also anestheticized. So, as I say, they are heavily aestheticized, and there is no real mention to the materiality of the soil itself, to the materiality of dirt, of the earth. And this is actually part of the wider metaphysical stance of most fascist regimes in the past, but also in the present. These ideologies, these far-right ideologies, are full of hollow claims to these lofty ideas about race and national identity and so on, and land. And there is very little actual mention to the real substance of things. So when I think about soil, I think that, first of all, I think about soil as somebody who has an experience of the rural world. I grew up in a part of my time as a boy and a teenager. I spent it in a rural area of Spain, in Galicia. And there we speak a language that is related to the Portuguese. And the word for soil is terra. And terra means soil, but it also means dirt. It can also mean the land, but the first thing that we associate with terra, that we associate with soil, it is this. It is this messy, sticky earth that is plowed, that you cultivate, and it's dirty, it's damp, it's something very tangible. I also associate this idea of the soil with something very, very material, with the clay with which pots are made. So it's again something that is related to peasant cultures, to pre-modern or pre-industrial cultures. And again, it is something that it is very material. It is something that you can touch, that you can smell, that you can even taste. And actually the taste of clay is crucial when you want to assess the value of a pot, for example. And then, of course, when I think about soil, I think about soil as an archaeologist. And again, the experience of soil as an archaeologist is not that different from the experience of soil that a peasant has or that a potter has, because it is a very experiential thing. Dealing with the soil in archaeology is hard, it's messy, it is dirty, it can even be painful. And we work with the same tools as the peasant, as the farmer. We work with shovels, we work with hoes. And it is painful, it is hard, it is harsh, but it is also full of joy. I mean, we love the soil, we love the earth, we handle it with care because we know there is value to the soil. And when I say that there is value to the soil, I mean that the soil is something more than just the thing that wraps the things that we are looking for. So the earth, the soil, is much more than just the envelope of the historical artifacts that we are digging up. The soil itself is an artifact. It's an ecofact, but it's an artifact. It is something that transcends the divide between nature and culture. It is both things at the same time. It is the past, but it is also the present. And we are very careful with distinguishing different kinds of soil, because different kinds of soil tell us different stories. And this is actually the basis of archaeological stratigraphy. We are trained to understand the different kinds of soil, the different textures, the different colors of the soil. And these subtle, sometimes very subtle changes in texture and color, even smell of the soil allows us to distinguish different layers, and therefore to construct archaeological sequences, and therefore to construct history, to build history out of the ground with the soil. And in that, archaeology is not that different from the work of the peasant or of the craftsman or craftswoman. Because for an artisan or a peasant, differences in the soil are also crucial, because different kinds of soil allow you to cultivate this kind of plant or this other kind of plant. They can be good for pasture, they can be good for cultivating cereal, they can be good for making pots or for making adobe. So these are conceptions of the soil that are, of course, in the antipodes of fascist conceptions of soil. And I think that the fact that we are in the antipodes of fascist conceptions of soil could be a good position to actually deconstruct these fascist, ethereal, metaphysical conceptions of soil that are tied to nationalistic, hyper-nationalistic, and racist ideas of the soil and the land. So in the remaining of this talk, I would like to present 4 vignettes, 4 very short stories based on my archaeological excavations in different parts of the world. 2 of my examples will come from colonial and post-colonial context in Africa, in Ethiopia and Somaliland, and the other 2 examples will come from Spain. The first 2 deal with the issue of colonialism and violence, and the second with dictatorship and fascism. So let's start with ash, with soils that are filled with ashes. And in this case, I'm going to talk about Ethiopia. Ethiopia was conquered by fascist Italy between 1935 and 1936. And when the Italians arrived to Ethiopia, they imposed their fascist policies, their racial policies, but also their extractive economies, and also their extractive agricultural economies. They imported a plantation system into Ethiopia that was very short-lived, but they tried to implement it in a countrywide scale. This meant intensive agriculture, agricultural machinery, and so on. So this model of intensive agriculture was in direct confrontation with the local ways of producing food, of cultivating the land, especially in the peripheral areas of Ethiopia that were and still are inhabited by small-scale groups that practice slash and burn agriculture. So basically, they fell down small plots of land, they burned the forest, these ashes help to fertilize the soil, and they have these crops that are the product of these ashes, of this soil filled with ashes. So for the fascist regime, this was something that has to be overcome. This was typical of primitive groups, and modernity necessitated something completely different. It needed intensive agriculture that was industrial agriculture, basically. So they tried to end with these traditional practices of slash and burn agriculture. But the thing is that ashes are just more than something simply related to agriculture. Ashes are everywhere in these communities. I would say there is a moral economy of ashes in these communities. Ashes are related to the production of food, but they are also related to the production of artifacts. They are related to feasts. Ashes appear in domestic contexts, around houses, in the cultivated fields, and so on. And this is something with which the modernist Italian agricultural engineer tried to destroy. This year, just a few months ago, we were studying this fascist base, this fascist headquarters that was established by the Italians in a remote region in the lowlands of western Ethiopia, in what was the palace of a former local chief who was also a slave trader. So we were studying this huge palace that looked so out of place in the context of the tribal lowlands. And we found lots of evidence of the Italian presence. So there were Italian artifacts everywhere. There were electric batteries, bayonets, shell casings, cartridges, tin cans, wares, and so on and so forth. And all these artifacts were burnt. They appear mixed with ashes and with the soil mixed with ashes. So they were scorched. This is the irony of the Italian adventure in in East Africa. So it was the slash and burn agricultures that got the upper hand, who won the war. So the future still in Western Ethiopia is for the slash and burn agriculturalists. It is this soil that covers the ruins of the Italian occupation of Ethiopia. And it is also ironic because the Italians practice a scorched earth tactic in Ethiopia, and it was their ruins that ended up scorched, but not by ashes that are related to utter destruction and annihilation, but ashes that give life. My second example is again in Africa, this time in Somaliland. It was the British colony in northern Somalia. And it is sand this time. This is a very semi-desertic area in the Horn of Africa, close to the beach. And here a couple of years ago, we studied and excavated a colonial town that was established first by the Turco-Egyptians in the 1870s, and then by the British 10, 15 years later. It was abandoned in the 1950s, and now it is a field of ruins. There are many ruined buildings, very impressive buildings built by the Egyptians and the British. And we were interested in knowing if this city was actually earlier than the colonial period, if there were actually remains that could go back to the Middle Ages, because we know that this area was important also during the Middle Ages, and there were merchants from Persia and India and Egypt in the 13th and the 14th century. So we started excavating test pits in the city. And to our surprise, underneath the foundations of these colonial houses of concrete and stone, there was only sand, layers and layers of sand. Actually beautiful stratigraphies of just sand, pure sand. But these different layers of sand were mixed with artifacts, with bones, related to the nomadic populations that have been visiting this area before the British and the Egyptian conquest in the 19th century. So in this case, literally, under the pavement, there was the beach. So this colonial world, this modern colonial world, tried to seal these other forms of life, these other ontologies, the ontologies and the forms of life of the nomadic pastoralists of Somalia. And what we found is these were repeated occupations of people coming to the coast with their herds during the short rainy season, probably in the month of May and June. They were coming here, they were celebrating, they were slaughtering their goats and their camels to celebrate. Their celebrating communal banquets. They were praying. And this was the world that was sealed by the colony. And it is very significant that the world of the nomads is associated to sand, which is fluid, it is mobile like the nomads themselves, whereas the world of the colony is of stone and concrete, because they want to fix populations, they want to make the settlement permanent. But it's in the Ethiopian case, it is ironic that the place now is being devoured by the sun. The city is covered by dunes, and probably in a few years there will be only sand and nomads again coming here to pray, to celebrate, and to graze their hearts. So my next example is silt. Silt is a special kind of soil. It is very thin grain. It's made of quartz and feldspar mostly. And it is usually found in suspension in water, so it is the kind of soil that you have with alluvium, with rains, with rivers. And the place where we found the silt I'm going to talk about was in the center of Madrid. More specifically, at the university city, near the ruins of the university hospital that was destroyed during the Spanish Civil War. This building was part of the front line during the entire duration of the Spanish Civil War between 1936 and 1939. It was also the place where the Spanish Civil War came to an end. It is the exact place where the Republican troops surrendered to the fascist troops in the 20th of March of 1939. Now the place is a park. It was redeveloped, re-landscaped from 1939 onwards. and there is no visible trace in the surface. So we decided to conduct test pits, trying to find elements that could be related to the war, to a war that has completely disappeared to the landscape at the university city and its surroundings, except for this monumental arch that is still today celebrates the victory of the fascists over the first Spanish democracy during the Spanish Civil War. So this is the only reference that we have in Madrid to the Spanish Civil War. The only monument that commemorates the war is a fascist monument. So the act of excavating this place was in itself an act of counter-memory. And we did find remains that were associated to the war. We found the remains of the nationalist headquarters in this part of Madrid during the war. And we found an air raid shelter that was built late in the war. Inside this air raid shelter, we find the last layer of occupation during the war. And this layer was full of artifacts. There were lots of shell casings and cartridges and elements of uniforms, bottles, tin cans, and even a lot of unexploded ordnance, mortar rounds, and so on. And all these artifacts, they were embedded in silt. And why in silt? Why with this particular kind of soil and not anything else? Well, we know that the very first day that the Spanish Civil War ended, it was a rainy day. It hadn't rained for several months, and then the first day after the war, it rained. And it rained a lot for 2 or 3 days. The objects that we found there, they were related to the celebration of the end of the war. It was the celebration of the fascist victory. And this is why we found so many bottles of cider and wine. And some of these bottles were still filled with rain, with the last rain of the Spanish Civil War. And my last brief example is another kind of soil, an object kind of soil, fecal sludge, and it comes from a concentration camp. In Spain, between 1937 and 1939, there were around 300 concentration camps established all over the country, which is more than there were during the entire duration of the fascist regime in Italy. And around 500,000 people passed through these concentration camps. There was indoctrination, people forced to make the fascist salute, to perform the fascist salute, and so on. Around 10,000 people died of starvation, beatings, and mistreatment in general. Many of these camps have disappeared. There are just a few of them that still survive. And there are very few that can be studied archaeologically in the sense of that can be surveyed and excavated, because most of the concentration camps were basically buildings that had been reused. But there were a few that were built ex novo, and they are similar to, well, Nazi concentration camps with barbed wire and barracks, prefabricated barracks, and so on. And one of these camps is the concentration camp of Castuera, which was in operation only from 1 year, from 1939 to 1940. We decided to excavate this camp, and we focused mainly in the latrines, and for 2 reasons. First, because latrines are usually used as dumps, and you can find lots of stuff in dumps, in these rubbish dumps. And we actually found lots of stuff in these rubbish dumps, in these latrines, mainly tin cans, which was the food that the prisoners were eating. They were usually given 1 tin can per 3-4 people. It is therefore understandable that many of them actually died of starvation. And also the artifacts related to life and death in the concentration camp. The second reason we decided to excavate this concentration camp is, the latrines of the concentration camp, is that latrines were more than just a practical thing. They are more than a toilet, for sure. They were an instrument of humiliation and punishment of the prisoners, because people were forced to go there in group, 100 people, 200 people, and they had to do their things in front of everybody, in front of the guards. The guards mocked them. Many of them fell in the latrines because they were very weak, because they were not eating. They had a lot of digestive problems, and this, of course, made the experience of going to the latrine particularly painful, a real ordeal. And this is probably one of the reasons most of the people that passed through the concentration camps decided never to talk about it. There are very few references to concentration camps. People really don't want to talk about it. Now, the thing is that when we were excavating these latrines, this is a very desertic area of Spain. It rains maybe 1-2 days per year. Sometimes, some years it never rains. But the exact day that we started digging, it started raining. a very strong storm. It started pouring water over trenches. And then suddenly the latrines were soaked with water. And there was this horrible stench coming from the latrines. And it was basically the stench of all the shit that was shit there by the Republican prisoners for 1 year, 15,000 people using this place as a latrine for 1 year. The people in Castuera now, they don't want to talk, in this place, they don't want to talk about the concentration camp. Many even deny the existence of the camp. Many of them, they actually don't know about the camp. Nobody talks about the camp. The camp is silenced. There is no memory about the camp, but the soil remembers. And that's my concluding thought. So the soil remembers. It also remembers those things that we don't want to remember. It is, from this point of view, a form of countermemory that we, with the archaeological method, can bring back to life. Thank you.